8th, 2023. The first thing we're going to do is upcoming meetings. We have a meeting on February 22nd, as well as March 8th, and the others are listed. We have a public forum coming up on February 28th. And I believe we have some minutes that may be ready for approval. Pam, do you want to talk about the December 7th minutes?
Yes, I sent those around a couple of times, I think. I got very helpful comments from Wendy and Warren. Thank you very much. Those were incorporated. I think that we should just, I think I'm ready to vote on them. So I suggest that we do. We don't have any more pending, I don't think. I mean, Karen can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's nothing. We're up to date in terms of our reviews, so we're behind in terms of January and February.
Okay.
And that's my report.
All right. Do we feel, does any of the board members need to discuss the December 7th minutes? I don't see anyone raising hands. So can we have a motion
that we approve the December 7th minutes as distributed?
Great.
Second.
And Alice seconds. All right. So Alice?
Yes.
Pam?
Yes.
Warren?
Yes.
And Wendy?
Yes.
And I also agree. So the December 7th minutes are approved, and we can keep moving forward to the director's update. Dave, do you want to take it?
Sure, thanks.
Thanks.
So a couple things in the director's update. The pole attachment agreement that we have had not been updated since I think 2010. So we had a request from the state to attach fiber from the prison farm to MCI Concord. So we've been going through that process. And as we went through the process, we had legal review the pole attachment agreement and update it. So that's been completed. As part of that, we had to update the fees. And for a joint owned pole, the pole attachment fee per month was $10.47 per pole. That's been increased to $12.41. And then for a sole owned pole, meaning a pole that the light plant owns only, the fees have increased from $20.95 to $24.83. So we're now in the process of updating the third parties that are attached to our poles in town. Annually, we bill generally that happens in January. So we held that, and we're going to do that this month with the updated fees. So that's good that that's updated. And
vehicle replacement.
you know, I was jumping around. I had to let some people in the meeting. So vehicle replacements, you may recall that we had a bucket truck that was scheduled for replacement. And we issued the PO in 2021. That truck is a 1992 material handler bucket truck. It was scheduled to come in this year, and the manufacturer informed us that it won't be in until 2024 because of supply chain issues, which, you know, we're seeing all over the place. So that's a delay, and that will hit the budget a little differently as we have it in there for this year, and it'll end up being next year. We're also in the process of replacing a 1997 Digger Derrick. That's the trucks that we use to set poles. Manufacturers tell us those are 2 to 3 years out at this point, and the prices increased significantly. So something that we're normally looking in the 450 to 475 range is between 500,000 and 600,000 now. So we will go through the specs and issue a PO this year, knowing that it's going to be probably 3 years before we get the truck. We also, this year is Concord Light's 125th anniversary. So there's a group of employees that are working on celebrating that anniversary. We will be hosting an open house during Public Power Week. And we haven't done an open house in, I think, 4 years, but they're usually well attended, and I think it's a good thing for the community to be able to come and see what our team does and just be engaged with the community. So that's in the early process, but there'll be updates as we move along. In the energy management side, we wanted to give an update on where we are with the programs. And you probably saw this little table in there showing you what the numbers were for 2021 and 2022. And just showing you the percentage of change. So heat pump installations for 2022, 178. We had 71 in 21, so that's a significant increase. And same thing with heat pump hot water rebates went from 10 to 17. Weatherization rebates 20 to 31. Solar installations went down from 43 to 36, and primarily that's because of the drop off in the state program. We did have the electric lawnmower rebates. That's new this year. We had a budget of 100. So far we've had 12. So I'm hoping that picks up, in the next month or two for going forward. EV purchase rebates went from 6 to 27. EV charging system rebates went from 40 to 57. And EV off-peak charging incentive program enrollments 213 to 290. So we've had success, which is great. And the last piece was I included the residential rate comparisons from MWEC. Those I included the October, November, December, and then the 12-month average. So that's the last one for the year for residential, and it shows us where we are in comparison to all the other MLPs and IOUs in Massachusetts.
So are you all done, Dave?
Yes.
So yeah, the rate comparison, I did notice that Concord was rather high, but this is including the PCA that we had on that was aggressive to correct for the beginning of the year.
Correct.
I also wanted to ask about the trucks. So these trucks are from the 90s. They're going to be replaced. The trucks that we purchased will last probably 25 years. So hybrid technology or batteries on these vehicles to get more efficient. Is that an option? Are they available?
Yeah, so the bucket truck that's already been ordered is a hybrid.
Okay.
So that's incorporated in. We haven't started speccing the digger derrick, so we'll look at that. The hybrid option for the bucket that we have on order was an additional $80,000. So there's a premium for it. And we really don't have any data on how well it's going to work and how much it's going to save on fuel. This is the first one, so we really have to look at it in terms of doing an all electric bucket. That will not happen because we're a 24-hour response company, and we can't stop to charge a vehicle for an hour or 2 hours, whatever it takes to charge the batteries. So right now, that's not a good option for us.
Great. Any other questions from the board on the update? Alice.
Excuse me. I'm wondering if we have a figure for how much we have invested in these energy efficiency programs altogether. What does it cost the light plant to incentivize these changes?
Yeah, so for 2023, we have over $900,000 devoted for the programs. That's in the budget. And you can look and see what we expended for 2022. We weren't at 900,000, but we're certainly, probably closer to 600,000 or 700,000. I have to look. I don't recall exactly off the top of my head, but it's a significant chunk of money.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I think we can go on to Jason's update for broadband.
Thank you. Just a note, we do post these monthly updates on the website at concordma.gov/broadband. Just click on monthly updates. But in terms of operations, I'm excited to announce that we have a finalist for the telecom technician position. So that's been a position vacant for a couple months now, and we're going through just completed the reference check phase, and now we're working to put an offer together with HR. So that's exciting, and hopefully that position is filled soon. And once it is, then we will move on to filling the network engineer position. This past month has been very busy with dark fiber requests. As Dave mentioned, the pole attachment agreement request or to update that coming from MCI Concord. We're getting a lot of these requests as well from site to site to have dark fiber. And this is basically when an entity wants to grab fiber from one location in Concord to another location in Concord and use that to put their own equipment and pass data through it. Early on in our operations, it was a great source of revenue, but we now take a really hard look at these leases because while they do offer some revenue for some fiber that's maybe unused, we also want to think about future capacity for the network. We don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot and lease out fiber for many years that we could be using to expand our network to other customers in town. But at the same time, we don't want to waste fiber that's just sitting there that could be generating revenue. So this part of the fiber network was one of the parts that isn't documented well. So we've been trying to increase the documentation so we can turn these requests around more quickly. And that's what we're trying to do now. We've got, I think, 2 that have come out in the last couple of weeks where people are requesting to see where we can get fiber from point A to point B in town. Working with the light plant staff on the advanced metering project, and that basically at this phase is just the siting of the gateways. These will be devices connected to the fiber network that will relay the meter data back to the sort of a home base and then to the cloud-based database. And so that part is mostly done, the review on our part, and then once those locations are approved by the vendor, then we will move to actually splice in those gateways and install them in conjunction with the line crew. Just wanted to give the board an update on the rate subsidies. So last month we discussed that and how we were trying to submit an application. I just wanted to give an update and clarify kind of where we are in the process and when we expect some things to happen. So the plan that we're working with is the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a federally run program that will provide up to $30 a month off of any high-speed internet plan that Concord Broadband offers. And the plan has certain eligibility requirements that are not too dissimilar from what we use for the lower rate that CMLP offers for electrical customers. So we're eager to participate in the program. We have an application ready to go. Before you can submit an application, you have to be either a licensed telecommunication provider, carrier rather, or you have to have a waiver from the FCC. When they envisioned this program initially, it had sort of spun off from a earlier phone related subsidy. And as a result, just to make the pool of eligible entities clear, they said you need to be one of these licensed telecommunication carriers first. If not, then you just need to submit a waiver so that the FCC knows who you are and why you should be able to submit to participate in this program. We've already done that a couple of weeks ago, and we're just waiting word from them. We've heard from I have a contact at the FCC because we have to file other paperwork that it's not a long process. So we do expect to hear back soon on that. And as soon as we do, we can submit our formal application. Again, everything else is ready. So it's just a matter of clicking submit on that once we have essentially a number from the FCC. That program turnaround time or the application turnaround time is supposed to be just a couple of weeks. So we're hopeful that maybe at the next meeting or the meeting after that, we'll be able to announce that that program is active, and then we can start advertising it to the residents and customers in town who might be eligible for that. And then I just wanted to update the board on the metrics. I know this is kind of a small thing, but we take these metrics very seriously, and there was a change to one of the metrics in the positive direction. But I just wanted to highlight it and explain why that change is there. So if you look at the monthly update, we track new customer connections, and these are brand new customer connections, places that have never had fiber before. But we also put on there disconnects. And I think that that's important to look at the total net number of customers that were increasing for new installs versus disconnects. But what was happening, we found, was that if there's a billing error, to correct that, what they do is they disconnect the service and then they do a reconnect. And so when we were running our report data, we were collecting some of those disconnects that were just sort of administrative disconnects that then were followed by an immediate reconnect. And so that data was erroneously high by about 9 over the last 12 months. So we've gone back and run reports to correct for that. And going forward, we kind of update our procedures so that we'll account for any customers that have had some billing issues that, then cause the system to need to disconnect and reconnect them. So not a huge deal, but I just wanted to explain it in case anybody was looking at the numbers and wondering why some of them look different than the previous month's updates. But and then I've got an agenda item later to talk about the task force updates, but I won't discuss that for now, and I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you. I have a quick question about those connect and disconnect numbers. It says new installations. If a customer, let's say there's a renter that leaves the apartment and then a new renter comes in and they get the broadband service, but it was already installed at that property. Is that a new install, or is that how is that captured versus the new?
Yeah. So we essentially have kind of 3 buckets for our service orders. One is a disconnect, one is a reconnect, and one is a new install. So what you see in new installs are where we actually had to run fiber to a new premise and do everything, from essentially the splice case or the LCC to the premise where the customer receives service. So those are brand new installations, customers that could not have had service before and require the most amount of work. The reconnects, which are not actually on that chart, are those customers, as you mentioned, who might have previously had service before, a home or apartment or condo or something, and they're just needing to have an ONT installed and kind of do that initial overview of the service. So that is something we could certainly add to that, just to kind of see. The other thing I was going to do is kind of a trend line, so you could just look year over year what the net customer increases. You can see it on that first chart, but it might be clearer just to kind of see throughout the year as you get a running total of the number of customers who leave versus the new customers who come in.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Any other questions about the update from the board? I'm seeing none. So I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is the Energy New England outside director. Dave, would you like to take this?
Sure. In December, we had an outside director retire, Thomas Whitney. He had been on the board since the company's inception. So it's the president and CEO's job to find a replacement, and John Zimmerangis did do that, in fact, and that's what we have provided to the board. Was looking for a type of individual who could be an asset to E&E, to the E&E board, provide insight and experience during this significant time of change in our business, and be able to provide perspective from an outside of our normal comfort zone, but someone that really knows the industry. And so he presented Paul Hibbert as the candidate that we would like to have on the board. Paul has done work for Wellesley. He's done work for Meme. He's got a pretty lengthy and impressive list of stuff he's done in the industry, which I shared with you guys. So I'm not going to go over the whole bio and all that because it's just, there's too much in there. But essentially, Paul has led E&E strategic planning a number of years ago, so I've had the ability to work with him, and I personally think he's going to provide a lot of expertise that will help us moving forward. I did provide the language that I'm looking for the board to vote on. And so given that I sent all that stuff, does anyone have any questions on any of it?
No, I want to say though that I was very impressed with his resume and his industry knowledge as well as his background with sustainability initiatives in carbon accounting. I think this will be a good addition to E&E. Warren, you have a question.
Well, excuse me, I just wanted to comment that I think Paul Hibbard's great. Not only does he have a really impressive background, but he's an easy person to work with and he's a good listener.
Excellent. Any other comments from the board or questions? Seeing none,
Happy to make a motion if you want.
that would be Pam.
I just wanted to add that I'm very grateful for the information that Dave provided on this and for Warren's comment. I think that these are not just rubber stamp decisions that we make on E&E, and that it's a very powerful policy drive for us. And I'm glad that we're being thoughtful and getting some data to back up any votes that we make. So thank you.
And Wendy, would you care to make the motion?
Dave, can I just clarify, do I need to state both of these paragraphs or just one?
I think the voted, the second one.
Okay, all right, just want to clarify. Okay, so I'll make a motion that Paul Hibbard be and hereby is elected as Director of the Energy New England Board to serve in that capacity for a term as defined in Section 3.2 of the Energy New England Operating Agreement.
Great. Do I have a, thank you, Pam. I have a second. Warren,
Approve.
Alice,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
and Wendy.
Yes.
And I also agree. I think he's a great candidate.
Thank you.
So we're all set on that approval. Now we're going to move on to the September financials. Dave, do you or Laura or anyone else want to take this?
Yeah, Matt's going to take the financials.
Yeah. Great.
Right. Good morning. So I provided to you a kind of a financial summary description with narrative and then some of the key highlighted areas that I thought would be important. And then I also provided a set of financial statements, which we'll go over in just a minute. I'll try to be pretty quick. There's not a whole lot to go over. So I'll just hit these highlighted items down here. The first one that we should look at is the unrestricted cash, which is the operating cash. This is obviously alarming with having a negative over $1 million. Sorry, I've got a sick kid home. So this looks bad, but it's a lot better than what it was before on the June financial statements. So I do think that by the end of the year, we'll be probably at around a zero balance is what I'm hoping. So
sorry to interrupt, Matt, but is this related to the PCA that we need to apply at the end of last year?
Yeah, so I think that's what's going to lift us out of this hole. The deficit is the PCA is going to put us back to where, at least where we're operating in a positive, in the black. So contrary to that, the restricted cash has actually gone up. So between the two categories of cash on hand, we've gone up almost 700,000 for the year, or from last year. The other one that kind of stood out to me was the AR jumped up quite a bit, almost 900,000. And I started doing some digging, and I had Carol and Donna look at this as well. And we believe that this is all attributed to the PCA and also this is August usage being billed right now in this time frame. So it was a really hot month, and the rates went up with the PCA, so it just kind of shot up, and I think it'll kind of level back down in the next couple of months down to around normal. We're continuing to pay off debt, which is good, and then I think we've gone over this area quite a bit, but our electric sales went up by 4.2 million. This is due to warmer weather or more degree days in 2022 and the increased rates due to the PCA. And then this is the next line is the reason why we did the PCA is because our cost of power went up quite a bit. Broadband continues to increase, steadily increase, which is great. And then down here, I've got some volume data to back up the sales and purchase power. So we've sold through September of 2022 almost over 3 million more kilowatt hours than the prior year at that time. And we purchased 1.4 more than the same period in the prior year. These figures here, starting with this 0.2, are literally just taking the sales divided by the volume and the purchase power divided by the volume. So it's not an exact figure, but it just gives you kind of an idea on a unit basis what's going on with the sales and purchase power. And then the last thing I'll point out is we gained 81 customers over this time last year for broadband. So as I said, continuing to grow steadily. And then I'll move on to the financial statements. I don't have a lot to hit here, but I do want to just kind of explain what each one is so you're aware. The first page is a balance sheet, which combines the two companies together. Then I'll scooch down to the second page. This is the electric company, and it gives you a 3-year comparison at September each year for that for the electric side. And then the next page is going to be the same thing for the broadband company, trending over 3 years. And then it repeats itself on the income statement or statement of revenues and expenses. We've got both units combined, and then a 3-year comparison. So what I will show you here is highlights the sales that we've done, going from 20.5, 22.7 up to 27.4. It's quite a big change in the last few years. And then you can see the same trend following in purchase power. And then last page is the broadband income statement over 3 years. Any questions from the board?
I don't have any specific questions. This is kind of what I expected to be in September, based on the PCA and the changes that came there. It's good to see that we're growing in sales and in number of customers. Yeah, there's any other questions from the board? Wendy.
Matt, in terms of accounts receivables, I know that you had a concern there, and that this is through September. And I know that at some point we stopped doing some of our policy outreach. And I can't remember, Dave, is it November where, we stopped issuing sort of notifications? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about the shutoffs?
Yeah, the shutoffs.
Yeah, so November 15th is when the moratorium starts.
Right. So do we think this year we really will end the year with higher outstanding receivables as a result, because of the PCA mostly?
I think, like Matt said, things are going to balance out a little bit by the end of the year. That's what our forecast is.
I'm sure we'll end the year with more than the prior year, but I don't think it'll be a ton more.
Okay. Just looking for sort of a gut feel, because it is concerning. But if you think it's going to balance out and you're tracking the accounts, that makes sense, I guess.
The thing that's going to help it is November and December usage was probably not as high as the prior year. So you have the increased rates, but you have a little bit less usage in those months. So that'll kind of balance it out, like Dave said.
Okay. And then obviously also, I know the unrestricted was negative, but from a cash flow perspective, you're not seeing a concern because we have such a high restricted cash.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of a transition period with the rates going up, but we also had that extreme, August was, I think, one of the highest months probably since I've been here, as far as temperature. And so you've got kind of a convergence of two different factors going on. And I think when I checked it for October's cash balance, it already had gone up $1 million from this balance.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Warren, you have a question.
Sorry, I need to unmute. Can you suggest what you think the impact's going to be of the fact that this is a relatively mild winter? And also, are there any financial benefits to us when there's a winter with less snow than normal?
I'll defer the snow question to Dave, but we did, as far as our budget for this upcoming year, or the year that we're in, 2023, we forecasted our rates based on pretty low weather days. We're fairly, I would say this year, very conservative with the sales and purchase power that we projected. So if we have a mild year, I think it kind of just fits into what we had forecasted. If we have a higher weather year than we predicted, and that usually just means better results than if it were mild.
Does that
Yeah.
answer the question, Warren?
Yeah. How about snow? Do we get any benefit from, sort of fewer maintenance issues or?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to snow, it depends on the type of snow, whether it's wet snow or fluffy snow, and what happens in terms of, outages. And so if it's wet snow, you have a higher probability of things breaking. So, we haven't seen a lot of that this winter, but it really comes down to the degree days in terms of what the usage is going to be like. So obviously we haven't had a lot of snow. It hasn't been all that cold other than last weekend. So, sales will be down. But as Matt said, we forecasted that in the budget. So.
Okay, thank you.
I'm also happy to hear that the rates were set expecting a mild year, because I know that, volumetric sales pay for some fixed expenses. And so if the expectation is higher volume and it ends up being mild and it's lower volume, we could be under collecting. But in the opposite case, we're over collecting, which you can always roll to the next year. So that's a good way to plan ahead. Any other questions from the board on our financials for September? I don't see any hands raised, so I think we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the Broadband Completion Task Force update. Jason, would you like to take this?
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
So if you'll recall, it was last July 13th of 2022, when the task force presented its final report to the Light Board. And by way of background, Article 41 at the annual town meeting in 2021 started up this task force with the intent to create a report to make a recommendation on how to achieve sort of universal access so that we had fiber availability to all of Concord. And the participants of the task force met nearly every week for over a year and put together a very comprehensive, long report that outlined many different aspects of operations and ended up with some key recommendations that were summarized in the report and have been adapted in summary form to the monthly updates that I provide. And sort of an appendix just to sort of keep that as a tracker. And as each update comes out, you can see that we're either working on or have completed another one. And I just wanted to take a few minutes today to talk to the board and the public and let everyone know that, we're still working on this, that this is still something that we discuss regularly at our internal, division meetings when we discuss broadband operations. It's something that I've been discussing with Dale Hartling, our new broadband manager, a lot to make sure that when we discuss longer term plans or a capital plan that we're taking into consideration some of these ideas. I can't thank these participants enough for their time, both in the meetings and presenting to the light board, public hearing, to the select board, but also individually. They've also provided a lot of counsel and discussion time for us. Scott and Mark especially have provided just a lot of feedback and counsel. So we're really appreciative of that. And these are people who care passionately about the town and want to see things improve. And so we'll take all the help that we can get. So I did provide in the packet this week or this month a sort of longer version of the summary that I normally provide that kind of outlines a little bit more of what we're doing on some of these items. I didn't want to go through every single one, but I was going to share my screen just to discuss a few of these. And then there's a couple that I think I would love to hear, some thoughts that the board might have. And so let me share my screen. All right, can everybody just about see that now?
Yep.
Okay, great. These recommendations in the final report were broken into several different categories, which I've highlighted in this document. So you can see policies, metrics for tracking, governance, strategic planning goals, budgeting process for fiber expansion, capital planning process, and construction and logistics. So again, this document is in the packet and it'll be available online to everybody to review in further detail. A lot of the metrics were kind of low-hanging fruit for us. We were already tracking those, or we just had to make some slight adjustments for tracking those. So we've done a lot by way of reporting out to the public and the light board exactly what's happening to increase transparency, and also let everyone know that we're trying to track our progress in terms of adding to the road miles, adding to the availability. I also wanted to mention that in terms of governance, which again, some of that is policies and financial goals, but we've made some progress on some of these and completed some of these, which is great. In terms of budgeting, we've done some of those items, but also have completed a couple. So that is good. We are, in terms of capital planning, and that is one of the ones that I'm most excited to start working on soon in a deeper way. I think that we bring these up in summary form at a lot of our meetings, but I think for substantial work to happen, there needs to be sort of an initiative or an effort. And as part of the capital budgeting process this year, we said, typically we use that form or process to look at our equipment, our trucks, our routers and switches, things like that. But we wanted to say, like, okay, with the goal of expanding access, how do we allocate enough funds to complete that expansion such that we have a realistic timetable as to when we can say we're going to get there. As the report outlines, there's a lot of obstacles or reasons why availability isn't 100% in Concord. And some of these are easy solutions and some of them are very hard and very expensive. So, we obviously have to take a calculated approach to expanding access so that we don't, essentially run out of money trying to provide instant 100% access to everybody in town. But we also want to try to do it fairly and equitably and not benefit certain people or developments over other people. So what we're trying to do right now is come up with a capital plan that allocates money every year toward this goal, and also can explain what percentage of the town we think this will add on to what we already cover. And so when we do that, we'll also be tying together some funding options that some of them are existing, some of them are unique. And so we're trying to sort of bring that all together so that we have something that we can present to the board, the select board, everybody, and just say, here's our 5 or 10 year plan. Here's what we think we'll be able to accomplish each year. Historically, we've been growing very organically by word of mouth mostly. And, while we add between 100 and, a few hundred subscribers every year, it's been a very gradual process. And we haven't done a lot to expand the base fiber network that goes into some of these developments that might have already been undergrounded before fiber was in existence, or figure out some of the multi-dwelling unit issues that we've been having. So I'm excited to, report that we've been working on all of those issues to try to quantify what the problem is and come up with a plan of attack and see if there's alternative technologies we can use to solve that. The task force recommended a few down here under construction and logistics, like the vibratory plow, which we think may have some application in Concord in very unique circumstances where somebody might have a very, very long driveway and we might have difficulty getting there in traditional means, or just cost prohibitive. But I think that for my benefit, I think the thing that would be most helpful for us is if the board could look at some of these policy decisions here that was recommended by the task force, because these are bigger than broadband. We don't think that it's in our power to just make a blanket decision, excuse me, to change a policy that we've held for maybe a decade. But we do think that these are worthy conversations that the light board, the select board, and ultimately town meeting should have, because there are people who think that we should fund this at any cost. There are people who think we should just kind of grow slowly and organically and get there, in the next decade or two when we have universal coverage. But how everybody in town feels about this will dictate sort of our operations and our strategy. And so I just like to, especially the first few, like universal access, expanding outside of Concord, and then the affordable housing and equity, inclusion, and economic vitality. So I'd like to open this up for questions about any of these particular goals that the board has, and then also if anybody wants to weigh in specifically on some of these policies, if you've thought about them, or if you'd like to, schedule a deeper dive into some of these, we're happy to take whatever approach the board would like.
Thank you, Jason. Does the board have any questions before I ask my questions? Warren.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the issue of expansion outside the current territory. I thought from an earlier presentation, this is listed as a low priority, that was something you were more actively considering. And I guess the question is, can that expansion be a significant enough moneymaker that is worth bumping up in priority because it could help fund other things?
Yeah, I think it depends. Obviously, we have different opportunities. I think that even some of these lower priority items, depending on the situation, immediately get bumped to a higher priority because of their potential impact. Like you said, it can have a ripple effect where it can position us in a much better place to do something else. And then the other thing is like maybe something like the roads improvement program and coordinating better with them. That might be not at our forefront, but then that program and opportunity comes up, and if we don't take it, we're gonna it's going to be a long time before we get undergrounded in those areas again. And so we've tried to seize the opportunity in terms of expansion outside of Concord, and when there is an opportunity for us to lay fiber for a certain project, we're trying to take that so that we have that option down the road. Again, it's all, people have different philosophies on this, because some people say we're a Concord enterprise, we should serve Concord first, we should worry about universal access in Concord, and then if we can expand, then that's great. But to your point, if we expand and there could be significant initial revenue, that revenue could be used for capital expansion inside Concord. So it's kind of, it's a philosophy, and I think it's up to the board and the residents and what they really want to do in terms of prioritization. But I think that what we try to do is take these opportunities to the board, similar to what the electric side does with new power generation, and we say, like, here's an opportunity that we have. And so I think I previously mentioned the fiber going to Acton Public Safety in conjunction with the REC, and looking at that as a possible way, could Concord Broadband fund the difference between the fiber that at a bare minimum required for that project versus what we could use for future expansion down 2A or 27. So I think that for us, it's not something that we sort of bump up until there's an opportunity, and then we say, okay, we need to think about this from a long-term perspective. But I think that if that's a goal, and you know, the board and others say, look, we think that doing that might yield more returns in the short term, then we can fund additional installations. But again, then that has to be a conversation with the residents who've been waiting for a long time in areas that are not currently served to say, you know, it might be a little bit longer, but at least now we have a way to pay for it. So it's just a conversation to have.
Yeah, so I'm going to make one quick comment, then go to Pam. So Jason, on that idea of expansion outside the territory, immediately my thought went to where we have water running through Acton. I know that we're going to this AMS system, and that those meters need to be able to talk to our network for those water customers along that strip. And that could require a fiber run along that same area. So we could offer broadband and collect meter data for the water department along that strip. That may be cash positive to then fund other programs, but it's opportunities like that outside the territory that I would support, because I could see how there's multiple values coming back to the community, whereas just going into a territory at cost, you know, that we haven't been in before, may be less appealing to me as a board member. But that's just because the point of this is to give you some guidance on these policies and their opinions. So I just wanted to share that. Pam, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered, are there opportunities for, shall we say, regionalization here? I mean, are there opportunities for partnering in a more official rather than ad hoc way? Let's say the ad hoc way is what Brian gave in his example. Anybody thinking about the economies that we might enjoy if we partner with towns which have similar interests?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely an opportunity for discussions in that area. I think one thing that's unique in Concord is that Verizon never did the Fios installation here. And so customers essentially have one fiber optic solution. In some of our neighboring communities, they do have Verizon Fios and they do have Comcast. And where there is more competition, that drives rates and services, you know, to a different level than they are here. So I think to be competitive, we really would have to make sure that we had our operations as efficient as possible and that we could offer competitive rates and services to those communities. I think that entering those markets that are very different could be challenging if we weren't ready for that expansion. So I think that maybe the ad hoc ways might prepare us to be better positioned for that. But I think that that's something that we've discussed with some other communities who've sort of been interested in small ways, like, oh, we'd like you to provide, you know, fiber to our municipal buildings in a ring and maybe Carlisle or Lincoln. But, you know, then we say, well, like, well, maybe there's an opportunity down the road. But I think historically it's been a matter of a priority and what can our operations sustain. What we don't want to do is expand to the point where our current customers suffer because we don't have the resources to address all of the needs that would come up by expanding our territory by an entire town, let's say. But still something that we're open to considering. We just want to make sure that the current business doesn't suffer and that the customer load, because, you know, necessarily like the investments aren't just capital for laying the fiber, they're also a lot of personnel costs that go into that. And so it's a big commitment, and we don't want to see. The approach to date has been very conservative, and as such, we're positioned in a really good place. But that also means slower growth and expansion. And so the question is, do we take that risk, staff up, have a huge capital outlay to provide those services? And then what happens if the market goes shaky or satellite service comes in and, you know, undercuts the price by 50%? So I think that historically, that's why Concord Broadband has taken the more conservative approach, just because the market changes a lot and they've been hesitant to take on that risk. But I think that it's a conversation we're still open to having under certain circumstances.
So just to follow up, I guess things can take decades to get, you know,
right
placed. I just wondered if there are any shall we say 30,000 kind of conversations going on with other towns where there might be an aspiration or a question whether such economies might be enjoyed if we were to partner.
Right, yep, yeah.
Are there other conversations happening, I guess is the question.
Yeah, those have happened in the past, and our goal is to have another one soon in another community. So yeah, when we have those opportunities, we do, because we just want to explore what could be possible and what their pain points are and what their residents are looking for, just because we'd like to know, and it also affects our business just so that we can remain competitive in the region, because some people come to Concord from having lived in a surrounding community and have certain expectations. So we try to stay plugged into that. So when we have opportunities to discuss with other town leaders or stakeholders, we try to gather that information. So we definitely have.
Thank you.
One of the things I like about the broadband service is the rates are the rates. There's not, I mean, I'm constantly getting promotional materials saying you get this discount, and then if you read the fine print, it says you're contracted for 2 years, but the discount is 6 months, and net it's going to be more expensive. That is more of the market that we would enter if we were to expand the territory, and I think the conservative approach is appropriate, because this is really it was begun to support the town, and there's a lot of risk in going into these markets. But I'm willing to explore any of those. I want to make another comment about policy topics. Universal access is important, so continuing to try to work with the multifamily housing complexes to get access to those properties, to work with other difficult communities, maybe those built in the 90s with undergrounding that didn't have the conduit. Coordinating with them for when they do their repaving or when they do other infrastructure work, being ready to support them in accessing broadband, as well as the PEG access program. I know that they are seeing decreasing funding from Comcast and other things, and we need to have a discussion about whether to or how the broadband service would support that. I think that's a future discussion. And then on capital planning, I want you to really look at the business and what's best for the business in capital planning. I know you have a debt load of paying back to the electric side for some early investments. But that is something that is somewhat flexible. I don't want to say it's available for anything, but we want to make sure that gets accounted for and worked over time. But I don't want it to slow the universal access or other efforts. So those are some of my other thoughts. I want to ask the board: does anyone else have any other thoughts on this? Seeing none, I'm going to ask, because this is a topic that I know a lot of people have, is there anyone in the public that would like to talk directly about the broadband that may have a comment? Mark.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I appreciate that you guys are engaging in the discussion, and the reason that we documented those various points in the report was precisely to facilitate this kind of conversation. There have been in the past discussions about, for example, how the availability of the broadband service in Concord could support some of the other things. When we talk about the territory, we tend to think, at least in the context of the light board, of the electric service territory. But as you pointed out, the water service territory isn't quite the same as the electric service territory. And so, what that gets a little fuzzy at the boundaries. There's, a few customers in Lincoln, there's a couple in Acton. So prior conversations have been had. The public safety network, for valid reasons that have to do with RF propagation, needs close cooperation between Concord and Carlisle. There are locations in Carlisle that would be beneficial for Concord Public Safety to have access to, and connecting the fiber network can enable those things. So I tend to think the way was previously described, that looking for opportunities where multiple purposes are served are the ones that make the most sense, as opposed to some, venture-oriented expansion at this stage of the game. So thanks for that. I do think that focusing on some of the internal policies, how within the territory, elements like the construction of affordable housing or additional recreational facilities or those kinds of things can sort of automatically have some, and these tend to be on the smaller level of investments on the broadband side, can support some of the goals like the diversity and equity goals and so forth. I do think that another element that was alluded to in the report, and maybe not as strongly as it should be, which is sort of an ongoing look at the business in its competitive sense and the changing competitive landscape. Jason referred to it when he talked about the low Earth orbit satellite competition, or the availability of that as competition to this service. That's something that simply didn't exist when we entered the business in 2013, 2014, and now it's runs the potential that there's already one existing provider, and there could be multiple providers, and so being cognizant of how that might affect the competitive landscape is also important. So it's just good that you're familiar with that, thinking about it in terms of the same way that we might think of options in the power supply contracts for the electric side, is that there are different ways of sourcing things that we might need or servicing the customers, and it's changing. If you're familiar with these now, then when a specific question comes up in the future, it'll be much easier to decide that. And I do think that these are things that the select board and town meeting ultimately get to define. But I do think that some recommendation and willingness to engage in that discussion from the light board is an important function of the light board. So thanks for taking my comments.
Great, thank you, Mark. Pamela, do you have a comment about broadband?
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. Thank you very much for adding the meeting packet to the agenda. That is so much appreciated. How important would fiber connections be to the development of a distributed smart grid with solar customers who have battery backups, have the batteries all connected together, and the ultimate goal of producing our own electricity with our solar and our batteries, and an integrated system like that? How important?
So and Dave, please correct me if I misstate this. The AMS system has its own communication pathways. So you don't need to be a broadband customer to have those kind of controls on the electric systems.
But the availability of fiber throughout town does facilitate all of the connections for the customer meters and potential future uses of smart grid applications. It just makes things a lot easier when we have that connectivity option all throughout town.
Absolutely. But we can reach those without. Does that answer your question, Pamela?
Yes. Would we need something else in terms of infrastructure in order to develop a virtual power plant?
Yes, but that would be off the topic of broadband, and we're going to go on to.
And broadband wouldn't be needed for that.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any other questions from the audience or the board on the broadband update? Okay, we're going to move on to the middle school solar and storage for a 30-minute discussion. Dave, would you like to lead?
Sure.
Thank you.
So basically broke this down into two pieces. One, as the board knows, we have the night meeting coming up to get feedback from the public. And I wanted to get the board's take on the format of how they wanted to see that. Typically, we would do, SDA is going to be there. So, typically we would do a presentation and then allow public comment. I just want to verify that's what the board wants to do this time, or is there a different format? And we're open to whatever, just thought we'd have a discussion before we started planning for it and not being what you're looking for.
So SDA will be doing the presentation.
So we'll do a presentation and SDA will be part of that. They'll be there as well.
But
So
you'll be leading the presentation.
correct.
And as was commented last night, do you feel that by the 28th, you can have renderings of what this array will look like on the school building? I know you may need to coordinate with SMMA on that.
Yeah, so that's our goal. I don't have a definitive, yes, we're going to have them by then. But I want them. I think we need them. So
Alice.
Personally, what I feel like we need to be able to deliver at that meeting is a detailed financial look at what this is going to cost, how it's going to be funded, whether we're owning or whether we're looking at PCA or not PCA, PPA, and how we make the decision. Not that we will have decided, but I think the expectation is there that we'll be able to do a full financial analysis.
yeah, that's part of the plan for sure.
Will we have handouts? I think that might be useful as well. I mean, some of the materials that the school building committee provided were quite helpful in their PowerPoint presentations and their background materials.
Okay.
There's been some discussion that I'm sure everybody's heard from the 13 million that we put in as a placeholder and what actual cost may actually be. And just it's a magnitude of difference in cost structure. So I think we need to be able to have some pretty good financials available.
Okay.
Yeah. And I agree. There's I had sent 3 of the citizens had listed out questions, and I had sent that to Dave and Laura. But topics that were covered there was, a summary of the goals for the town, for the utility, for the schools. Why is this project in existence? Kind of answers, look and feel, the visualization of it, the project design. How was it? How was the design created? What were, how did we meet the net zero of the property? How did we maximize solar on the site? How did we determine different aspects of the scaling and size of storage, the need for storage, and then the cost side of what do we expect this system to cost? Why is it the cost the 13 million? But also, what value does the utility see from operating a system? This is driven by our town goals, but we also need to know the value return to ratepayers from the investment, and a general idea of how that compares to contracting for outside power that would power this building. And then other summary topics, let me see here. Yeah, just physical dimensions, safety systems. This is a power plant at a school, so we have to explain how it will be safe for kids to go to school every day, how the interconnection and the batteries are set away from the child areas, but are also protected from any kid that's wandering around. Snow, how is the swells will be taking snow, and how will cars be protected from the canopies and snowfall and ice. So these are the kind of questions I've been hearing. I did give you the detailed Word document with this list of questions. And so I think that's helpful. Pam, you have a question?
No, just, you were just, I think you answered some of it, but you just said you got a number of reactions from the public. Do you get formal letters that you are not sharing with us? And it may be appropriate not to share them with us, but it may be appropriate to share them with us. So I just wonder, if nothing else, in your directors, in your share update, which you may or may not give, you might tell us what you're hearing, and also we should have, maybe if there's a formal email or something, we should have those. What do you, when you reported all this stuff just now?
Yep.
Is this anecdotal, stopping somebody on the street? What is this all about?
It is anecdotal. So I did have a few people that I know in town that are interested in this topic email me, and I replied to them. I'm very busy, so please help me in organizing this. And so I asked them to email me a list of their questions, and I then took those 3 people's questions and I organized them into a Word document so that I could say, here, this is what I'm hearing from people in town. Because, you know, we as members of the Light Board are the representatives for citizens in town. So I don't know if that falls into, you know, needs to be shared in the minutes as a formal submission. I'm willing to do that. But that's a more formal process that I've done in the past. It's, you know, sometimes I hear things anecdotally. So
I think this is an important conversation, because if there are quasi-official comments coming in from the public, especially on something like this, I mean, I think we should talk about how much we should be able to see these, and instead of getting a filtered version through a well-meaning summary. The other thing that and this is related to a question I posed to Dave and you, I think earlier, we've gotten a couple of things in from people in the last meeting, reactions that, and I asked the question, where do we put these? How do we respond to these? Somehow some of them don't seem to belong in the minutes, but I would be curious to know, when we get, you know, interesting and helpful input from the public, who's responding, and where do these written documents and material from the public reside? Dave, maybe Dave should answer this. I mean, I mean, and maybe not today, but there should be. I don't quite understand all of these dynamics that flow, and where we should be more transparent or not, and where we should be experiencing filtering, well-meaning filtering from you or not, what we should do with comments on the street, which we all receive, which can be very, very, very distorting, or very, very, very helpful. It's an issue that we have to deal with. I think if the board disagrees, I mean, tell me that we should not spend time on this, but I am concerned a little bit, and I do value what we've gotten in from the public that has come to us, either directly to the board or to individuals in writing thoughtfully.
So Dave, you want to give a quick response on what you feel qualifies as something that should be included in the minutes versus something that is, you know, a customer service call, you know, that we get daily from many people?
Yeah, so if you receive a call from someone and they have feedback and you share that in a board meeting verbally, that gets put in the minutes, right?
Right.
If you share an email with the entire board, and it's discussed in the meeting, that should be put in the minutes as well.
Good. Okay, good. All right. Yeah.
If you receive something after the meeting from a citizen summarizing what they think they said in the minutes, in the meeting for the minutes, that's not included unless it's brought up at the next meeting. So their comments would be put in the minutes, but not their submittal that's after the meeting. That would have to be discussed in the next meeting, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay.
What about anecdotal material that Brian has personally, we all get? What about anecdotal material that you have chosen to honor or not?
Well, I just cited this document in the meeting, so I think it should be added to the minutes. I think is that the right interpretation, Dave?
I think so. But I also think it should be shared with the board.
Okay. I'll forward that on.
And I think we should be, anecdotal material. I don't know if we need a policy on that, but boy, we all get a lot of stuff, and I get uncomfortable when I start seeing some stuff that's, maybe just, that's not careful processing, it seems to me. If we are doing anything like that, but I don't want to get derailed here. I think it's all of it is good. It's positive to get as much information in economically. So I applaud your efforts, Brian. I just think we have to be very, maybe at some point when we have the luxury of it, talk about how we deal with all this.
I think that's a good idea. We'll talk about this topic at a future meeting. So I'm going to put down a note to do that, put it on my list of future agenda items, is how do we manage feedback from the community, and at what level do we start doing lots of documentation about, a thanks for the meeting kind of emails versus, substantive emails.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And just finally, what do we do when all of us get lots of anecdotal comments?
Yeah,
and it seems like they're being handled differentially, perhaps, which I don't think it's a little disturbing, I guess.
Okay. Wendy.
Brian, just one comment. So sometimes when I have gotten feedback in the past that it's directed to the entire board, sometimes it's not clear that it was intended to be sent to the entire board. So I think you as the chair, if you receive it, might need to validate whether it is the citizen's intention to have it distributed. And I think that's helpful. And then when it is intended, then it should be distributed.
Yeah, for example, these emails began as directed at me. And I saw the situation and wanted to make sure we had the best meeting to answer the public's questions. So I took the initiative to organize them to help, make sure that the community had their questions answered and we didn't forget someone's question. Is that a formal light board request, or is that a request of me? I've mentioned it in the meeting, so I'll put it in there, but we'll circle back to this topic and have a further discussion about how to handle this. I do want to redirect us back to the middle school project because we do have a lot to cover.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Dave, do you want to go on to the next portion of the finances, and or you have more format questions?
No, I think I got the format down. I just want, I didn't want to set up something and then it not be what the board was really looking for. So the feedback's been helpful, and we'll start planning for it. At this point, we're gonna go through.
Sorry. On the financial, cycling back to Alice's point, you said you will or something. Are we going to see the
he's going to that right now.
Oh, he's going to, okay, because, all right, thank you.
So now we're going to transition over to the financial analysis. We have a little presentation. So Laura's going to lead the way. She did a great job running through the numbers and getting a summary together. So with that, we'll present that, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the middle school solar and battery. We've put together a summary financial model. We have some of the information and specifications more known than others, and some we have placeholders. So this is not a 100%, first of all, design. Solar Design Associates is still working with SMMA on the final location of some of the rooftop and obstructions. So the specifications and costs I'm going to share with you today are subject to change. I don't think probably materially so, or an order of magnitude so, but I just don't want people to take this presentation and say these are the final numbers. So first of all, what equipment are we talking about? SDA has designed a system that will both meet the kWh energy consumption expected at the school in full on an annual basis, and also maximize the solar production capacity at the location with the limitations and requirements that the school had for visual appeal and other matters. So that ends up being 503 kilowatts DC of rooftop panel capacity, 773 of canopies, which consist of different sections. There's the northern canopies, the southern canopies, the walkway canopies. The combined total is the 773 for a total combined capacity of 1.276 megawatts or 1,276 kilowatts DC. SDA prepared load profiles for each section of this solar facility, the rooftop and the individual canopies, on an annual basis by hour. And so we have a forecast of what the production is going to be from this solar facility by hour. Their total expected production in year one is 1.554 million kilowatt hours, which is about a 14% capacity factor, which is fairly typical of Massachusetts. On the battery side, the battery size was selected partly to make sure we could cover the full solar output of the facility. You know, if it's a sunny summer day and there's no load at the school, the battery can absorb the full production capacity. So it's 1 MVA apparent DC power, which is similar to 1 megawatt. It has 4 hours of storage, so 4 megawatt hours DC year one. The anticipated 97% one-way efficiency, and the power requirements of the battery are 4 kilowatts at standby and 36 kilowatts at full discharge or charge.
Laura, sorry to interrupt, but on those numbers, can you ask SDA to provide the round trip AC to AC efficiency of the battery?
We'll get to that, Brian.
Oh, sorry. All right. Thank you.
Okay. This is a rendering, the most recent for the project at the middle school. Dave, I don't know if you want to walk through any of this. I'm not quite as familiar with the layout as probably you are.
Yeah, I mean, this hasn't changed all that much since we originally shown it. There was one section that was removed where you can see those parking spaces that are adjacent to the road. And most of those panels were relocated into other sections. So the output didn't change that significantly. And Laura, you already hit on the roof and adjustments for changes that are coming, but no, it's this is pretty much the maximum you can get there at this point.
Okay, I don't know if there are any questions on that.
So shading on the roof, I've got the PDF from the website here. I'm not sure what there's some HVAC systems which may be quite tall, and there's panels that look to be laid out directly north of them. SDA has looked at the shading from the expected equipment on the roof to ensure that there's no panels that are going to be in constant shade from these devices, correct?
That's been taken into consideration, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on, here are some assumptions about the solar portion of the project. We already said it's 1.276 megawatts DC nameplate capacity. The expected cost of just the battery energy storage system, the BESS, is expected to be just under 4 million. That's the sum of the rooftop system, which we're estimating will cost $2.50 a watt, and the canopy section, which we're estimating will cost $3.50 a watt. So that total is 3,964, and the total, including the other upfront and ongoing costs, year one, is 4.614 million. We're estimating about $250,000 in engineering costs, Don't know the O&M yet, but we put a placeholder of 10,000 in. Similar with the warranty, because it's likely that regardless of a contracting methodology, whether we outright own it or PPA it out, we will be having the the solar panel company providing the O&M and obviously the warranty. Shipping and duties, we asked SDA to provide us with some cost estimates for similar systems that have happened in Massachusetts, and we believe 40,000 is a reasonable number. Installation and balance of plant is pretty unknown at this point. That's somewhat of a placeholder. And the interconnection, Dave and Joe and his team have initially spec'd out, and it's looking like that's going to cost possibly north of $200,000 just for the interconnect. So all in at this price of 4,614, that works out to be $3,615 per kilowatt DC nameplate capacity. We're assuming 0.5% annual degradation, which means each year the solar panels produce just slightly less than they did the year before. But 0.5 is a pretty small factor, so it's good. It means we keep producing quite a bit. And we'll see a little bit later more about this, but we're assuming a 2025 electricity price market of about 6 cents per kilowatt hour, and REC's worth 2.5, for a total all-in production value of 8.5 cents, not including peak deferral, just for the production. And then in terms of estimating the system's benefit to CMLP for reducing transmission and capacity expenses, from the full load profile that SDA provided of the production capacity, we're able to know in each month what the output of the combined arrays is during the peak hour. And I've just defined what I believe the peak hour is likely to be based on past history for each month, and then put alongside it what the array is producing during that hour. So in the winter, for example, between 5 and 6 p.m., the array is not producing any power at all. In March, during the same hour, it's producing a very small amount, 22 kilowatts. In the summer, it begins to produce more, but it's still relatively minor. When you think about the system being 1,000 kilowatts, 168 is, 15%. But in the big summer months, when we are likely to have our capacity peak, the peak hour usually shifts to earlier in the day. It's a hot afternoon, and right now we have it estimated to occur between 3 and 4 p.m. That might not happen. It could be between 5 and 6. But right now we're giving the benefit to the solar array of saying, okay, look, we're going to say that the peak's going to be in August between 3 and 4 p.m. And at that time, the solar array is producing 408 kilowatts, so about half its capacity. And these numbers will be important later when we look at the economics of the peak deferral value. On the battery side, even though it's 1 megawatt in theory, sort of nameplate capacity, you don't get 1 megawatt out. You get 0.97 megawatts or 970 kilowatts power active at the point of coupling. And the discharge is not quite 4,000 kilowatt hours, it's 3,850 active at the point of coupling. We're assuming 1.5% annual degradation, and we're also assuming that we're going to cycle this once per day. And we don't need to cycle it once per day, probably to capture the transmission and capacity peaks, but we are going to operate this battery for arbitrage value. We're number one, the battery is to deal with solar saturation. Okay, so we're going to be charging it between like 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. every day just to absorb the solar. But then we're going to discharge it during the evening peak and capture the price differential between the afternoon and the evening, because the evening is typically more valuable than the afternoon. So we're going to do that every single day of the year. Some more facts and figures, which, unless you're really into the details of this, may not mean anything to you just yet, but I'm just going to review them very quickly for those who are interested. In terms of our forecast accuracy for accurately estimating when the peak will be, we're assuming that 2 months out of the year, we miss the transmission peak, usually April and October. We're assuming once every 20 years, we cannot estimate the annual capacity peak. We're assuming a capacity reserve margin of 30%. We are assuming the arbitrage value I just talked about. The escalators, commodity price 1.5%, managed services, no and M 2.5%. The regional transmission or RNS costs, we're assuming 6% escalator for years 1 through 3, and then 3% after that. In terms of the cost of the system, SDA has given us $600 per kilowatt hour, which is 2.428 million for the battery itself. And then we have, like we did with the solar panels, some engineering costs, shipping, installation, balance of plant, interconnection, O&M, and then there's an additional ongoing annual fee for the battery that I'm calling managed services, which is the cost of actually dispatching this battery once a day. And we put a $30,000 placeholder, but Dave thinks this is reasonable. E&E already provides this service to a number of its customers for the batteries that they own. So any questions on the sort of assumptions before I go into the financial outcomes?
Yeah, the RNS, the 6% escalator makes sense to me. I'm surprised to see the reduction in that escalator after 3 years. The trend has been pretty steady for the last 15 years. You're confident in it?
No, I'm not confident in any of these assumptions, but I don't think it's reasonable to assume a 6% escalator ad infinitum. I just don't think we can sustain that. And so wanting to be just a little bit more conservative, because the less we escalate it, the less savings we assume, right? And it could be more. But if we bank on 6% every single year, by year 20, the number's so inflated. I mean, do we really think that that's what we're going to be avoiding in year 20?
No, I agree. I just wanted to question it and make sure I understood. Thank you.
Okay. So if we assume all these things, what does a financial payback look like? And what I'm going to share with you is the net present value of 20 years of cash flow. And we're going to look first at what the capital costs and financial impact would be without any type of credits. So that's without the Inflation Reduction Act subsidy and without any ARPA funds. We saw that the solar capital cost would be 4.6 million and the battery would be 2.9 for a combined total of 7.6. Without any credits, the 20-year cash flow NPV is negative 2.7 million and the battery is negative just under $1 million for a combined total of 3.6 million in losses. If we assume that we can capture the Inflation Reduction Act subsidy, and we put 500,000, which is my understanding of what the town has allocated of the ARPA funds for this project, to the solar, it reduces the solar capacity cost to 3.6 million and the battery to 2.3. And therefore the losses are reduced from 3.6 down to 1.4. These charts below here show you that if we allocated these losses to the ratepayers and we were to do it equally, so every single kilowatt hour that we sell, has to be paid for by ratepayers. A residential R1 customer using the average quantity of 869 kilowatt hours a month would see a $27 per year bill increase resulting from these economics. There's a big jump in 2034 because, as we'll see in a minute, there's a requirement to replace the inverters in year 10 of both the solar field and the battery. And that's a pretty substantial cash outlay. And so that's why it has a disproportionate effect in year 2034. The annual customer subsidy in the with credit case is about $14 in the early years. And the reason it declines, except for the bump in the inverter in both cases, is because, as we'll see, our debt service, our interest payment obligation is declining over the years. And so that is helping us to reduce the negative cash flow. So I recognize that these numbers here, the 2.6 million negative, maybe somewhat mysterious to people, like what is that? What does that represent? We're gonna go explain that next.
Could I ask one question? So when looking at the IRA tax credit, you mentioned that and the ARPA would be applied to the solar. But I believe the IRA credit could also apply to the battery. Is that correct or incorrect?
So in the with IRA case, both the solar and the battery are benefiting from the IRA. You can
Okay.
see the battery capital cost is reduced from 2.9 to 2.3. But in the solar case, we're using both the IRA and the ARPA.
Great, great.
Okay. Okay, so what are these? What does this 20-year NPV mean? What is this minus 2.6 million? What's it made up of? And I'm sorry for these numbers, but there's sort of no other way to do this in the way I look at it. We have a solar output expectation, which starts at 1.5 million kilowatt hours in the first year and declines slightly over time. I'm showing you in this year's 25, 26, 2034, because that's the year the inverter is required, and the last year, just because, you know, we've done this for 20 years, but to show you 20 columns was just going to be too many on the page. So I've kind of shortened this. So everyone understands that with a capital project and equipment like this, there's going to be annual operating expenses. We've put in the O&M expense of $10,000 a year, escalating at 2.5%, and the warranty costs at $15,000, escalating at 2.5%. These numbers could end up being different. SDA told me that sometimes the manufacturers actually bake these costs somehow into the initial capital cost, so you wouldn't experience this. So this remains to be seen, but these are placeholder values for now. And with those numbers, you can see the OPEX is about $25,000 a year, escalating at 2.5%, except in year 10, when we have to pay $212,000 for an inverter, which we're expecting to cost. Today, it costs 20 cents a watt. We're expecting that to drop in half to 10 cents a watt in 10 years, but we are escalating it for inflation at 2.5%. So that works out to be $212,000. On the debt service, the initial payments are about $460,000 a year in the unsubsidized case, made up of equal amounts of principal and interest. But as the years go on, your annual interest payment declines, and therefore your debt service obligation declines. So the total cost is the sum of the debt service and the OPEX. First year, $486,000, declining to $282,000 in year 20. On the revenue side, what we're calculating here is first the production value, which is equal to the 1.554 million kilowatt hours times 8.5 cents, which is the combination of the electricity market value and the renewable energy credit value. So that is worth $132,000 a year. And the peak deferral value, which we're going to calculate on a separate page, is worth $38,000. So your total revenue is $170,000. Your total cost is $486,000. So your cash flow in year one is minus $316,000. That sort of stays steady stream until you get to year 2034. You have a bump, and then it declines because of the interest payments. But if you take all these cash flows from year 1 through 20 and you net present value them at a 5% weighted average cost of capital, the net present value of those cash flows is minus 2.68 million. And so that is where this number comes from. Okay. And so we do this both with without the credit, and here's what it looks like with the credit. Your debt service is quite a bit lower in this case because your initial capital call is lower. And so the total cost, instead of being, $400,000 to $500,000 a year, is only $335,000, declining to $202,000. The revenues are the same. So the cash flow negative is much lower. It actually turns positive by the end of the term. But you again take the net present value, and that's 1.2 million. Has anybody fallen asleep yet?
No, this is great.
Okay.
This is my nerd stuff. So
I
yeah.
know, but I'm worried I'm only talking to you, Brian, and nobody
Yeah.
else cares.
I get it. Laura, this is really great. You've done it.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
this is very helpful.
Now we're going to the battery, which is slightly more complicated than the solar panels. Okay, but I'm going to explain where these numbers for the battery come from, the 887 and the 267. And the battery is a better financial investment, if you will, from a financial perspective. It has less negative cash flow. Okay, so the battery, we still have OpEx, which is pretty minimal in year one, because the warranty is typically included in that year. But if we assume a warranty cost of about 25,000 a year and the managed services of 30, the other operational expenses are the energy costs, both in standby mode and for cycling the battery. And right now, these costs are projected to be fairly minimal. So your operating costs looks like, 37,000 in the first year, and then it's more like 60,000. It does escalate because of inflation, and you have that big bump in 2034 to pay for the inverter. But other than that, you're looking at 60,000 to 100,000 a year over the term. The debt service with no IRA funds is about 300,000 a year, declining to 150. And so the total cost is the sum of the debt service and the OpEx, which is about $350,000 a year, declining to 250. On the revenue side, which is completely calculated on another page, Brian, so we'll get there. But the summary is that we're assuming a total peak reduction value from all sources. That means the regional transmission, the local transmission, and the capacity of $186 per kilowatt year in the first year. Which if we multiply that by the available energy at POC, okay, is worth plus the arbitrage is worth 205,000. So we'll get this breakout in a minute. So you've got an outlay OpEx at 331, revenue of 205. So your cash flow is a negative 125, and it actually cash flows positive in the final year, in the later years. So the NPV here is negative 886. If we look at it with the IRA funds, the cost is about 300 a year, declining to 200. And with the revenues close to 200, growing to 300, you can see that the cash flow is negative by a much smaller amount, and cash flow is positive in the later years. So the NPV is negative $267,000. Those are the summary. I have more slides on the peak value, Brian, on the energy arbitrage and some of the nitty gritty, but I didn't really want to go into that just yet. I want to make sure we keep the attention of more generalists on the, in this meeting, who may glaze over if we get too detailed, and just maybe talk about the summary financials first. Is that reasonable? Yes. Yeah.
And I just wanted to request that you share this presentation with the board.
Of course.
Yeah. So seeing year 20 net present value being negative values, it still doesn't pay for itself after year 20. Is that a good interpretation or a poor one?
No, the cash flow, it's cash flow is positive in the later years. It's just that future money's not worth as much as today's money, right?
Yeah,
and you have
right.
the big negatives up front. So when you add them up all together, it's still negative.
Okay. And this array, we're planning on a 20-year life, but this could be a lot longer than 20 years. Not the battery necessarily, but the panels would degrade at 5%, at 0.5%. That takes quite a while to get to a significant degrade. So we will own and have this asset. We will have higher maintenance for inverter replacements and batteries in the future, but once it's up, it's something of an asset. Whereas the Kearsarge, the W.R. Grace, and the landfill, we have to buy out those PPAs in the later years, and there's a tipping point for those agreements. But this one we're buying in the front. So, does any other board member have a question? I see Alice's hand.
Yeah, thank you. So for the presentation on the 28th, this is really helpful for me to understand the detailed analytics behind this. There are several, I think we don't want to present this to the public. I think this is way too detailed, but to be able to have conversations around this would be great. I think we need to get to the big decisions, the big items here that the community is going to want to know. And the first is, I think as Brian said, this assumption is that CMLP is going to own the system from day one. And so that was a question that people asked, are we going to own it, or is it going to be similar to the Kearsarge agreement with the PPA? And I think that's a big decision that people have to understand. And we need to understand what are the economics that drove us to the decision to own it versus a PPA. Because I think that's a question that's out there.
I mean, I think it's reasonable, Alice, to expect that you're going to pay 20 to 25% more if you engineer this through a PPA on a net present value basis. You do get some benefit for that. You know, the third party is sometimes taking the risk for the output, like they're guaranteeing a certain availability of the solar panels and or specifically the battery. Whereas we would be taking the risk of the degradation and malfunctions, right? If we own it.
Mhm.
So
So-
you pay a pretty big premium, but you do reduce some of your risk.
So I think that's important to discuss. I think, up until this point, when the board has asked that question, how are we going to make this decision about whether we own it or whether we go with PPA? We haven't been able to answer that in the board because we hadn't done the analysis. This is the analysis of a CMLP owned system. Was there an equal analysis done on the PPA that came up with the decision that we're going with an owned system? I think that's a question that we will likely have to respond to, and we ought to be prepared to maybe make that presentation about how we decided to own the system and not do a PPA. I'm going to guess that most people coming to this event will not understand the level of detail that's here. I am grateful for this conversation. I get the big picture of it. And I think that's what we need to deliver in the message, and messaging around how we communicate this is going to be really critical. And that the community has to have confidence, as I do in Laura's analysis that brought us to certain decision points. So I think a summary slide of the decisions that have been made to date and the impacts on people's bills are the big things that people are going to be interested in hearing. They've just voted. At the time of the public meeting, we will know the outcome of the school construction project, a significant increase in their taxes to pay for the school in general. They'll want to know what are the increased costs to have solar on it. So I would take it up several layers for the discussion to the public, and know that it's built, all of the decisions that were made were built on detailed financial analyses, and that we can go through them all if anybody wants them, but that's my take on it.
And Alice, I agree with you that this is more detailed than the public forum requires. But I do feel it was required for today. I think I too appreciate this level of detail, and I know some members of the public will as well. I also, not only looking at the net present value of the money from year 1 to year 20, but without this project, what would the cost be to the customer? Because you're here saying the $27 increase for the average customer, but that assumes that this is an additional purchase. There's nothing it's offsetting, and so the normal billing for our average customer over 20 years, how would this $27 be reduced if we just had to go out and buy power on a contract? Does that question make sense, Laura?
Yeah, but that's actually been answered, Brian, because the values used in the assumptions for the energy production are market values. So that 8.5 cents is what we could buy solar for with RECs on the market.
Okay.
So there's no
so-
impact on the bill from that component.
All right, good. That answers an important question for me. So this $27 annually is an increase based on this being our owned and operated array compared to business as usual for contracting.
Correct.
All right. I also would make the request that instead of being an annual increase of $27, maybe also say what the monthly increase would be of, $225 a month.
I mean, you
Instead,
can just divide by 12, but you're saying you want to see it.
yeah, people think in their monthly bills. So I want to keep it relative to that, because even when you say down at the bottom, 870 kilowatt hours a month, I think you should also do monthly values for the vertical.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other board member questions? Alice, can I go to Pam, Alice, real
Sure.
quick?
Yeah,
Just
sure.
quick, this is redundant really, but I mean, Alice is so on the money with this, with how you actually, the presentation to the public is of course hugely important. So my question is simply, are we going to have another set of slides to review that will show the more high level presentation for the public before the
Well, I think that the general question is, do we need to see the final presentation before it's shown to the public? And that's a question for me to the board.
I guess I would say that I would like at least one or two board members to do a little, truth testing on whether this actually speaks to the public. Just because it's such an important piece of presentation, yeah.
I think that's a good idea. Alice, if you and I took a look at the presentation prior to the public forum, would you be willing to review it?
Willing, yes. Able, I'm not convinced. I'll be away for 2 weeks.
Yes.
Reachable the first week, not so much the second.
I would like to review the slides prior to the meeting, but I also want another member to do it because, I have strong opinions. So Wendy, would you be willing?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Great.
Great. So Laura and Dave, if you could share that with Wendy and I, ideally before the 26th, so that we have a day or two to review it. Alice.
So one more question. We currently have a warrant article that has a placeholder of 13 million. What I think I saw in this presentation was something far less than 13 million. And I think that's something that I think is a message we need to get out there pretty early. I mean, if my recollection of the numbers isn't great, but I'm going to think that it's somewhere around 7 million as opposed to 13. That's a sizable difference. And we may want a little cushion, I get it. But I think we can start getting the message out there that it's far less than the 13 million that we put in as a placeholder on the warrant article.
Yeah, the placeholder was based on 2 megawatts of storage. And so, SDA came back with 1. So there's a little difference there, but it is good news. It's, less than 8 million, which is great.
Well, thank you, Alice, for that question, because it reminded me of a question I had. So the change, the original 13 million was assuming a 2 megawatt, 8 megawatt hour system. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah.
And you said in your presentation, Laura, that the battery had more value than the solar array itself. Is a larger, because I know we've kind of scaled down this to match the output of the array, such that we can absorb that and dispatch it during the evening. Does it make sense to make a larger array to then use some grid power at 3 a.m. to give a base charge and then let the solar fill it up the rest of the way and discharge all of that into the evening peak? Is there operational value in having a battery that is partially charged by the grid is kind of my question. I know you did not do the analysis on this, so this is very ballpark kind of thinking here.
Yeah, we didn't do the analysis. You're right, Brian, on that. We'd have to answer that question.
Okay. I just see an opportunity for citing more storage. I know we have a 60 kilowatt hour target in the climate plan and others. So, these sites don't come up often. If in the future we decide to expand this, we still have the footprint available to us.
Yeah, that's the other piece to it. You know, the footprint can get pretty large, the larger you go with the battery. Laura and I met with a battery provider a couple weeks ago, and they kind of gave us a presentation, and it was pretty eye-opening on some of the square footage that's needed when you get to a larger scale battery. So
Could you, for the follow-up to this, could you tell us if the original 2 megawatt, 8 megawatt hour system, if the 4 megawatt hour system can be expanded to the 8 in the future with the existing footprint? That would be good to know. So,
Okay.
yeah, so if we don't do it now, can we do it later? Just don't want to lose a siting location.
So what I would say to that, Brian, is, you know, we really need a battery on the other transformer more so.
Correct.
And if we were going to put another battery in or more battery storage, I would be recommending that we put it on the circuit that feeds the WR Gray site, because that's the major saturation issue.
Correct. So that's why I'm just future proofing here. It's not necessarily it'll be the next battery, but someday in the future, the other transformers are going to start to get saturated, and we would want sites to put storage.
So if we did just the solar at the middle school without storage, we would be pushing that transformer towards saturation as well.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I saw that Pam had a question.
Yeah.
And I will get the public questions after I do the board.
That exchange was really helpful to me, because in terms of are there economies in having more storage capacity or not? And it's a question that we should be able to answer, but I think that was really useful for me. Back to Alice's point too. I mean, we all calculated a big difference between the way the article is currently drafted and what the presentation was, which is, as people are saying, very good news. My question is, in terms of the article itself, what happens procedurally there? Are we going to resubmit? How's that going to work, Dave or Alice, maybe?
Alice, do you want to answer that, or you want me to answer it?
I'll go with your answer.
It's amended by the handout, correct?
Yeah, we'll amend it.
And what will the number be?
Pretty much what we've made the assumptions on in this presentation, unless we have anything that changes, but I think you would be looking at the full amount. I would think we would recommend without IRA and without ARPA, just in case those two things fall through. And then, you know, if we are successful with both of those, then we end up borrowing less than what we said we could borrow up to.
So the number would look something like 8?
Yeah, somewhere around there, yeah.
Like we're dropping way back. Great.
Yep.
So that will be presented to the public when? Like
On the 28th.
Oh, great. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
And so it'll be presented then, and we'll also have to present at a hearing as well.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, Mary, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Laura, thank you for that outstanding presentation. It would be good for not only this, but subsequent solar installations across town. When I look at it, what I'm seeing is that with or without IRA and ARPA, we're going to actually reduce the value of CMLP between 1.5 and $3.6 million over 3 years. And that assumes a pretty modest increase in rates to ratepayers of about $14 to $27 a year. So my question is, are you able to figure out what would the rate increase need to be in order to make the NPV break even? So instead of keeping it at what I think, again, I think $27 is pretty modest, could you raise the rates so that you don't, in fact, destroy value as shown in the NPV?
I'm going to let Laura take that.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So I believe, if I understand your question correctly, Mary, that the answer is the rate impact that I showed you. In other words, what I've done is I've said in each and every year, if CMLP had to cover the cash loss in that year through rates, how much would we have to raise rates to
Exactly.
cover the loss? So that's what that rate increase is. It gets us to 0.
So the NPV that you're showing is without the rate increase.
Correct.
Ah, perfect.
And I
Great.
should make that clearer. 'Cause it's
Yeah,
not
that's a
obvious.
big difference to me. This was, we're gonna raise rates by $27 and we're also gonna have a degradation in the value of CMLP by 3.6 million. So that's a big
Oh,
difference.
yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, thank you.
Charlie,
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I thought you did a very detailed job on this, so I appreciate that. These numbers are helpful. I guess my initial reaction is that some of these prices just appear high to me. And that being the case, they'll appear high to other people as well who are familiar with the industry. The National Renewable Energy Lab numbers are quite a bit lower than the ones you're quoting. Plus the local project numbers that we've researched are quite a bit lower as well. So you've got a price per watt, if I calculate it correctly, about $3.55 for the solar. That is just, again, I'm not an expert on this, but it appears to be high. And I think it would be very helpful to have base references that show where that number came from. Likewise, with the storage prices appear also to be higher than what we see in the market, substantially higher. So not sure why they are, where they are, and I think that having the referential information would be really helpful. I'm sure you've got that somewhere.
and Dave can answer this better, but these are numbers from SDA. These are they've been doing these installations quite a lot. They know a lot, and they are estimates. So we do have to go through a bidding process with this to get actuals. And so I think these numbers might be somewhat conservative to ensure that we properly fund this project. And when we go to bid, we'll know actual costs.
That's fine. That's fine. But I think, I would hope that SGA would then present that data that you're referencing rather than just say, hey, this is what we think.
Can I interject here? This is a question from, I think Laura and Dave should respond.
I
to
was
this.
going to go to Dave in just a second.
Yeah, so the numbers are from SDA. They're from all the stuff that they've gathered. They have projects in Massachusetts that support these numbers. So, they're the experts. We're taking their data and using it. So they're real. And we have more detail than Laura showed. But yeah, point taken, Charlie. But they are real.
Jerry, you have a question?
Yes, hi. Thanks, Brian.
And then I'm going to go to Wendy after that. Sorry, I didn't see you, Wendy.
Jerry Frankel, 132 Jenny Dugan Road. I guess first, I want to sort of self-identify. I was one of the folks that Brian mentioned, sending him comments and questions. I sent to Brian because I really didn't know what the appropriate channel was. And so I started there and he passed that information along. So I think you all have my questions and comments, plus others, that of others. So I want to add a couple of additional comments and perspectives here. I appreciate all the details that Laura, you and David presented today. I think those were sorely needed. And I'll second Charlie's comment about the need during the public presentations to show some comps of what other installations have done, how much has it cost them, and where do we fall relative to those others. Based on some research that I've done in previous battery installations around MLPs in Massachusetts, these numbers do appear to be high. But I also recognize that SDA knows what they're doing. They have a lot of experience. And so I think simply they should come prepared to with some comps of their own to show where these numbers came from. But I think the bigger issue here for me is that we collectively need to sell this project to the town. I think as Alice pointed out that, special town meeting just approved an additional amount, beyond an additional amount for CMS. And I personally am concerned that the PV and the battery system will be a little too abstract for people to understand the value that we're getting for it. And so and in this case, I think this is a CMLP, but I'm using the we more broadly. We need to be prepared to tout the benefits of this project to the town. And so, for example, a couple of things I have not heard here today in terms of benefits are, for example, there are environmental justice implications of doing this project, positive ones for this town. If we generate our own electricity, that means we're not depending, or at least we're depending less on other installations around the state, which in many cases are in EJ communities. So this helps us do our part socially for environmental justice. Secondly, installing the PV here provides a benefit of effectively locking in long-term prices for our energy costs. As we've all experienced over the last year, energy costs have risen dramatically. And actually, another compliment to CMLP, you folks have done a great job in mitigating those costs. But I think it's fair to assume, at least some people will think, that costs will continue to rise going into the future. Perhaps not as much as we've experienced in the last 18 months, but no doubt energy costs are likely to increase. This PV system is a hedge on those increased costs. That's a material factor for the populace, and I think we need to point that out. Additionally, there are other benefits. I don't want to go into them here. I'll just keep it short, but there are resiliency benefits, there are backup benefits. We need to see a strong presentation on what this full set of benefits are to our citizens. If we're asking them for money, which we will be, it needs to be more than give us money and your rates are going to go up by $27 a year.
Yeah.
We need more meat to that.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. So I'm going to go to Wendy. We are over time, so we're at 9:34 and we're supposed to adjourn at 9:30. So I want to go to Wendy, and then I would ask that the rest of the comments be non-redundant and be brief. Wendy.
And I think Jerry actually said it. I was going to say that in our presentation. There are larger benefits. But my other comment, Brian, is I have to leave because I have to give a presentation.
Okay.
So I had to drop, but just kudos to Brian and to Laura and Dave. This was really a great presentation. So thank you so much for those efforts. And I look forward to working with you on the updates. Thanks. So apologize, Brian, but I do have to leave.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm going to go to Phil. You will have a comment.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. An excellent presentation. The PV and battery prices seem high to me as well, based upon a presentation that SDA gave recently for a 1.3 megawatt array on the Belmont High School. And so that would be great to provide that. Other thing is, I think that'd be very useful is to include an additional line item for the total present worth in addition to the net present value. Then that will give the residents a better context, and that total present worth will be a higher value than the net present worth. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Phil, for being concise. Dean.
Thank you, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. thank you so much for this presentation. It is just great to see the level of effort and detail that's provided here. A couple of extremely minor comments about the presentation. The term BESS being used in the first slide, which is really all about solar, seems like it belongs on the second slide, which is about batteries. So maybe I'm missing something there, but I think that was very confusing to me. I'm like, BESS, right? Isn't that a battery energy storage system? It appears to me that we are overlooking two things that would potentially have a lot of sensitivity in this modeling. One of which is we're counting on 6.5 cents for the energy cost or 6 cents for the energy cost and 2.5 for the REC value. But we're overlooking the avoided cost of transmission, even though we're taking some account for capacity. You made some efforts to, align and find your capacity peaks each month, but transmission is on every kilowatt hour, and that's avoided. So that needs to somehow factor into the value here. And the other piece I question is on the battery 20-year model in year 2034. There's a real anomaly in the totaling. If you could put that slide up, I would just like to confirm that I'm not missing something there.
She explained that was the inverter replacement.
But that's on the battery slide. That's not on the the inverter is charged against the battery in that interval right there. It just seemed like a real anomaly in that particular slide. That's all.
It was, and it's that over $200,000 for the battery. I'm sorry, the inverter.
So we're looking at the solar, and there's no real huge leap. Well, it's 316, 300, 399. So it's like, okay, 100,000. But now if you go to the battery slides, if you could. Battery, no IRA funds. So 125, 131, 371. It just seems like it's out of line with what was happening over on the solar side. I mean, it's not even close. It's much more. So that just is an anomaly that I think needs to be identified because it jumped out at me. That's all. Otherwise, thank you so much. And if we could somehow account for transmission costs in the model. In addition to that, we're using 6 cents for our energy cost, but that's not what we're collecting because we're using a PCA to, find ways to adjust. And that PCA, the chances of that going negative are 0. So 6 is the actual floor, and it's probably always more than 6. So thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Yep.
And Pamela, if you could be concise and additional to the discussion, that'd be great.
I think it might be useful to expect that people will come who are against this as being silly and frivolous and tree hugger nonsense. And they're going to need to I second what Frankel said about we have to sell it. We have to sell it to the people who already know how it works, and to the people that don't. And the people that don't are the ones that really need to sell it. So we need how the system works, a little primer and how the whole electric system works, and how this feeds into our decarbonization plans and sustainability plans and resilience plans and all of the other plans in the town. We need to put it in here.
Yep, that's a big driver of this, because we could go out and contract for less expensive energy through nuclear or other types of contracts. But we are doing this because the community has a goal of siting solar in town to do our part and not push it onto other communities. So that's above and beyond the financials, but this was more of the financials part of the discussion.
But it's part of the finances. Those are financially valuable reasons. And can the electric vehicle to grid capabilities of the school buses?
That's not in the current design, but that's a different topic that we can.
But it kind of isn't, because this is the whole town energy system.
Well, so we are 11 minutes past the end of when this meeting was scheduled to end. And so I'd like to continue on with more comments. Pamela.
Oh, one last quick thing. I think putting the letters and like the PowerPoint thing you made about into the online in the packet so that we could go and look at it is the place to store it. Please do that if you can.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pam, I see you put your hand up.
Yeah, very quick, extremely quickly, but I think that a review in terms of the town understanding everything, the big picture on Article 30, Article 51, and the commitment through a town vote needs to be really driven home in this
Yes.
presentation. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, that I had made a comment earlier about how we have to really state the town's goals. And there's so many goal statements that this relates to. So we should definitely make sure the community is reminded of those goals that have been set. Carrie, thank you for attending.
Sorry, I'll be very quick. I know you're trying to wrap up. I mentioned this last night at the school committee meeting, but I just wanted to reiterate. First of all, this has been incredibly helpful. Thank you for all of the data. I am, as we're trying to think about the middle school, it's really helpful to try to understand all of these specifics. One thing that I think would be really helpful is just a rendering for this February 28th meeting of what it will actually look like. So I just wanted to reiterate. I think the community has become very comfortable with the current rendering, and it's not actually quite accurate with how this will all look. So just my plea for some type of what it will look like from Old Marlboro.
Yeah. So yes,
Thank
there's ongoing efforts to get a rendering made, but we can't say it's done. So we don't want to confirm it will happen, but we're making every effort to make it happen because you're not the only one requesting it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. I'm gonna transition to public comments not related to solar, which I hope there isn't. But if anyone wants that opportunity, I see no hands, so I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Pam, do you mind making a motion to adjourn?
No, I move that we adjourn the light board meeting of
Great.
February 8th.
I second.
Great, thank you, Warren. Warren,
Yes.
Alice, and Pam,
Yes.
and I agree as well. Thank you all for attending. This was a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.